Uh-oh.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Every Awesome 80s Movie. This is where I am on a quixotic quest to watch, in some cases rewatch, every movie from the 1980s.
That's a lot of movies.
Well, at least I'm going to start with every American movie from the 1980s.
Oh, yeah.
And then I might expand it from there. But what I'm trying to do is basically
archive?
Well, I feel like the 1980s were, for me, they were the years where I went from being a child into a teenager.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the movies are filled with nostalgia and magic. And what I want to find out is whether or not my nostalgia has tainted my view.
If it's correct.
Yeah, because if somebody asked me, it's like, hey, what is the best decade of movies? Right. I would say the 1980s.
Really?
In part because I love Steven Spielberg.
Oh, true.
And the Steven Spielberg movies that were directed and produced by Spielberg and George Lucas. And so those kind of movies I absolutely love. I love the science fiction and fantasy aspect and the whimsy of it and what doesn't.
I think although there are some funny things of translating old humor, which, like, to me, like, I know the 80s isn't that long ago.
Ancient Greece? Well, you're talking about the 80s.
I'm talking about the 80s. But there's something interesting about 1980s. About, like, going into depth about some of the jokes or some of the things where it's like, okay, I don't really, like, as a younger person, I don't really understand some of the things. Like the whole subplot in this movie where they're like, the housewife's position is shrinking in America. Like that's a huge subplot.
Yes.
And it was just like, okay, like I guess.
All right, so what we're talking about, Mackenzie and I, a little bit is how to analyze a comedy. Yeah. Especially if it's a comedy that's kind of
it's like pretty
okay.
Good. It's fun to watch.
Yeah. So it's this, and today we're talking about Lily Tomlin's 1981 film, The Incredible Shrinking Woman.
It's great. I would highly recommend it.
Good.
It's a good movie.
Well, I loved it as a kid. And I guess what I'd like to do for this video is I would like to talk about this movie in 3 different ways.
Okay.
Way number 1, I want to talk about my reaction when I was 9 years old.
Yeah.
Then 40 years later, I watched it again as a 49-year-old. So I want to talk about my 49-year-old reaction to it. Yeah. And you're in your 20s. Yeah. And so I want to get Generation Z, millennial, or what?
Wait, I am Gen Z.
All right, so 9-year-old me. So I mentioned this to you, but let me mention it to them. So I watched this film when I was 9 years old. It was one of the films that I saw it on the big screen, and then it came out on, this is back when they had VHS, they also had Beta. And it eventually came out on like HBO and Showtime. Yeah. And my mom would sometimes record her favorite movies, and this was one of the movies that she recorded onto VHS. So we had about 24 of those kinds of recorded movies, and those were the ones that I would watch, like late nights on Saturday night.
What other movies did you have?
Oh gosh, we had the Star Wars movies. Yeah. Oh, we had movies like Romancing the Stone. Yeah. My mom was obsessed with Somewhere in Time. So basically a lot of 80s movies. Yeah. Because that's when she was recording them. As a kid, I loved the idea of shrinking down. Yeah. And it was thrilling in movies like The Fantastic Voyage. Yeah. And it was also scary in TV shows such as Dr. Shrinker. When I was a kid, Dr. Shrinker was this Croft and Marty show. It was by the makers who did HR Pufnstuf.
Oh yeah, creepy. Okay.
So creepy, weird stuff.
It's like creepy in a kid's package.
Yes. So it was packaged as a kid's show. I haven't watched it for years. Maybe we'll do a reaction video of that later. But there was this evil doctor, Dr. Shrinker. Yeah. And he also had a little person played by Billy Barty that was also like meh ha ha ha. And so the people shrunk down to about this size, and so even the little person, Billy Barty, was a gigantic person too. Yeah. So it was scary, but it was also fun, and they had wacky props, and so that's what you get out of this movie. So as a kid, I loved the sets and the props. I loved that because I was a mama's boy. I loved my 9-year-old self. Loved that this movie cast a very loving mother, right?
Yes.
Lily Tomlin, really, her character really loves those kids, and she wants to work really hard to still do the chores and make breakfast for them, even though she's shrinking down to the size of a Barbie doll. And as a 9-year-old, I felt like, yes, that's a loving mother, and that's exactly what she should be doing. She should continue to, as best she can.
That's what she has to do.
Yes, of course she's going to do those things. Like, it didn't cross my 9-year-old mind.
Like, that's
like,
so
wow,
dangerous.
maybe the father and the children should be pitching in.
Yeah.
And the
or,
mom.
you know, the maid that they have.
Yes, yeah. And so things like when she's grilling bacon and she's next to. She only needs to trip and fall in the bacon grease, and her tiny little self would
just
die.
one little tiny piece of bacon grease needs to come flying out, hit her square in the face.
Yeah. And also, my 9-year-old self loved the gorilla.
Oh, yes.
Sydney.
Absolutely great.
And believed that was an actual gorilla.
Yeah.
So I don't think until I was a teenager it dawned on me that it's like, oh, that's an actor in the suit. And I found out later it's like Rick Baker.
Yeah.
The amazing makeup artist is the guy that's actually in the suit.
It's awesome.
Yeah, so I loved all of the wackiness, and I loved the imagination of it, and I loved the mother character played by Lily Tomlin. So that was my 9-year-old self. So let's hear from your
22.
You're 22 now. I can't believe it.
I can't remember.
Let's hear from your 22-year-old self.
So here's the thing. It was like very funny on the surface, like your 9-year-old self realizes. It's like, wow, this is kind of a funny movie. But then there's just like existential horror and dread. And it's very much Metamorphosis.
The Kafka
Kafkaesque.
story.
It's very Kafkaesque. Because she's just like, I just gotta keep doing stuff. And she's shrinking. And the people around her are like, you just gotta keep doing stuff. Like her husband's like, why aren't you doing stuff?
Yeah, so there's this
like,
idea in both Kafka's Metamorphosis and The Incredible Shrinking Woman. Yeah. I love that we're bringing those two together.
I couldn't think of anything else.
You know, but in both of them, they are sort of awakened to these weird changes that they have no control over. With Metamorphosis, it's an instant change. This one's a gradual change, but it's still the same thing of them just trying to cope and trying to continue on with business as best they can. Yeah,
they're just trying to do their usual thing, and they cannot, and they can't accept it either.
Yeah.
And I liked it. I liked the movie a lot. The gorilla's great. Like we had said, like, yeah, that's a person in a suit. And then I found myself thinking later on, like, man, that gorilla's doing a good job. Like, it's hard to, like, the gorilla work is worth watching the movie alone. Like, it's a good movie. I agree. But that, like, all the scenes with the gorilla is like, jeez, holy cow. Yeah. Like, the way he moves. I also loved all the props. I was about it. But most of all, I think the movie just gave me a sense of fear. Like, it was funny, and I laughed at certain parts.
You were dreading every moment.
Like, afraid of it. Like, I didn't like where it was going. Similar reaction to Metamorphosis, when that guy's trying to get up off of his shell. Every time I read that book, I'm like, this is awful. This is the worst. I'm not about it. And so I had the same feeling throughout the movie.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the film gives us a distinct... Now I'm going to talk about it as a 49-year-old who overanalyzes things too much. And I'm glad you brought up Kafka because you're following in your father's footsteps.
Yeah. Oh, wait. I did want to say, at the end, spoiler alert, I guess, if you're going to watch the movie, she's back to normal. And she's like, we're going to put on my wedding ring. And she's growing bigger, and I was like, this is the worst thing in the world.
They show her slipper, right? Start to bust.
It's like her
shoe or whatever. Her shoes,
gets
so
bigger,
her foot's getting larger.
She's getting larger.
And she kind of smiles, and then it cuts to the credits.
I didn't like the smile. I know the smile was like, it's happening again.
Yeah. It's here we go again. And as a kid, when I saw it, that's what I thought. It's like, oh, there's going to be another movie, but she's going to be gigantic, and it's going to be really funny. But you were freaked out about it.
It's horrifying.
Mackenzie was unnerved.
She has to go through that again.
Unnerved.
I mean, at that point, I just jump in a vat of just chemicals.
Just until you get the balance right?
That's what she did before.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a lot. That's a lot to deal with. I feel like the Cheese Whiz has something to do with all of this.
Well, it was also...
she's always near the Cheese Whiz.
There's Cheese Whiz and there's all those other products. Yeah. So it's basically, one of the themes is that consumerism sort of overwhelms our lives and makes us feel insignificant or small.
Yeah.
So do you think that, and this was made in the early 80s, is that true in today's society?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm of the mindset that as technology progresses, humans get to do more of the things that they like. Mm-hmm. Like, I know everybody's, like, afraid, like, oh, robots are gonna take our jobs. And to a certain extent, they will. And it will minimize.
But it gives us more free time.
It gives us more free time, and it gives us more abilities to do things that humans usually like more than doing.
Okay. So it sounds like you're saying, in some ways, certain products that we buy and consume
like our phones,
are going to be beneficial for us.
Yes, in the long run.
In the long run.
Yeah.
My favorite scene, I think when I was a kid, and still as a 49-year-old, my favorite scene is when she is trying to climb up to the windowsill and tell her family to come back.
Yeah.
And she falls off the windowsill and falls off the soapbox and then slides down into the sink and then into the drain. And everything about that moment, I think, is well made with the set and the prop. You know, like the large set pieces and props. It still, I think, looks really good.
It looks awesome.
And it, like you, I, as a grown-up watching it, I was, even though I knew everything was going to be fine, I was still unnerved in ways that I wasn't when I was a kid.
Yeah.
As a kid, I think I just knew she's going to be okay. It's Lily Tomlin, and it's a comedy, so everything's safe. The reason why this movie was more disturbing for me to watch as a 49-year-old is because of the noise level. Everything is just so loud. All the kids are screaming and talking at once. Neighbor kids are over. Adult neighbors are over, smoking cigarettes and talking about, you know, the latest products. And they're pitching commercial jingles, and they're listening to loud music. The maid is dancing around, and her family's coming over. You know, so there's all this hustle and bustle. And as a kid, that was sort of the status quo.
Right.
But now, and when I was a parent of young children, when you were little,
small,
right? Then that was the status quo as well. But now that the kids have grown up, and now we're kind of out in this nice, relaxing COVID. Outside. Yes, it's quarantine and everything's quiet. Watching that movie made me cringe because it's so noisy. So she's in the drain screaming for help, and the maid is not hearing her, and she starts to flip the switch just a little bit so that it shakes a little bit. It's like, ooh, scary.
Honestly, this probably gave me more fear.
More fear?
And adrenaline than watching We Need to Talk About Kevin.
There you go. There's the Generation Z perspective. When I was a 9-year-old, I thought that everything that the mother character was doing was good and appropriate. That she should be striving to be a homemaker.
This is great.
So that's obviously a very old-fashioned perspective. And since that time, you know, when you were a baby, I was the primary caretaker for your first 2 years of your life. So I was with you 24 hours a day.
Right.
And changing all your diapers and feeding you and worried about you and taking you for stroller walks and doing all that stuff. While my beloved wife was working and paying the bills. So I got to experience being a full-time homemaker for 2 years. And I think one of the themes is that society belittles homemakers.
Yeah.
And so in the late 90s, when I was taking care of you, I didn't feel belittled the way the characters are belittling Lily Tomlin in this movie, but I did feel a sense of isolation, and I felt a sense of, I guess this kind of, I felt a sense of insignificance, like because I didn't have a career title attached to my name, I didn't feel as important as my wife and her coworkers and my old school friends and things like that had gone on. And so even though being a homemaker was very emotionally fulfilling, there was still a status aspect.
A social.
We didn't have the word FOMO back then. But there was this fear that I was missing out, or fear that I wasn't rising to who I meant to be. And part of that was probably being male. But I think a large part of it was probably just part and parcel to our society back then, and maybe still now, that we don't necessarily value homemakers. We kind of think like, oh, you should be able to raise your kids and do
work.
Something else.
Yeah.
So you were interpreting that she's becoming smaller from some outside aspect, not like the chemicals.
Right.
But there's something about her.
I mean, I don't know. I don't really care why she got smaller. I'm of the mindset of like, yep, this is happening.
Well,
what else?
in magic realism,
yeah.
you wouldn't need to have some kind of science fiction
right.
explanation.
Yeah.
It's just like one day you wake up and you're half
smaller.
the size. You're
yeah.
getting smaller. So there's also one more thing that I didn't notice as a kid that I noticed as a grown-up, and that's near the we're giving away spoilers.
There'll be a spoiler warning on this.
near spoiler warning. So near the very end of the film, she has escaped with the gorilla.
Yeah.
They get to the grocery store. There's chaos ensuing. Yeah. She climbs up to the table, goes to the microphone, says, "Hey, everybody, come here, gather around. It's me, I'm still here." And so they all gather around. It's like, oh my gosh, she's still alive. And then she says that she thought that she had something to say.
Yeah.
And then she realizes that you don't need me to tell you what to do, or what's good for you, or what's not good for you.
Yeah.
And then she is continuing to shrink.
Yeah.
And she's basically talking about being at peace.
Yeah.
And feeling one with everything and everyone.
Yeah.
And that she's not afraid. And then she sees her loved ones just as she's shrinking, so she says goodbye. Bye. And on the one hand, the way it's filmed, it's very whimsical.
Yeah.
I remember being a kid and being scared, like, oh no, she's dead.
That's actually one of the times I'm not scared.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, finally. She's small enough no one can hurt her.
Well, what about paramecium and stuff like that, and amoebas and things like that? So it has this little message that basically says you don't need to preach about things.
Yeah.
So I thought that she was going to give this warning about consumerism or about
the evil society that exists.
Social problems, and then she's like, you know what? You don't need me to tell you that, and I'm at one with everything, and peace out.
Bye. Well, it honestly, it's a little bit of my philosophy. Mm-hmm. My philosophy in life is that I'm very small. That's
you say that a lot.
I'm very small. We're all very small, and we need to recognize we're very small. And that's it. If everyone in the world was like, wow, I'm small, and you're also small, let's just be small, I think the world would be, like, better. Because when we get in our heads, like, I'm important, or, like, this is important, then we kind of lose focus of, like, the small things that we should be paying attention to. So if we recognize, like, I'm small, my entire, like, scope of my life, all of my memory is small, you know? I only have control over so many things, and so I have to make these small things good things. So, I don't know. I'm small.
I'm small too. All right, well, thank you, Mackenzie, for discussing this. The
sequel to the prequel to Downsizing.
Yeah, it's the prequel to Downsizing. Yeah. So thank you for discussing this fascinating film and joining me on my journey. You don't have to watch all the 80s movies with me, but from time to time, I'm going to call upon you to help me overanalyze these 80s movies.
Let's analyze.
Yeah.
I love analyzing things.
Yeah, me too.
It's too exciting.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Bye.